I don't have enough, the gray-haired man mumbled, desperately searching his pockets again. Coins clattered onto the counter, not nearly enough for the meal he'd just eaten. The line behind him grew longer, angrier. Eyes glared. People whispered. The restaurant manager approached, face twisted with irritation. "Sir, if you can't pay, I'll have to call security." The old man looked up, embarrassment washing over his weathered face. His threadbare jacket hung off his thin frame. His hands trembled slightly. Then came the voice that changed everything. "I'll pay for him." A young woman stepped forward from the register next to them. Lisa Chen, her name tag read, 22 years old, working a double shift, with just $43 in her checking account until payday. "Lisa, no," her manager hissed. "This isn't your problem." But Lisa was already swiping her card. "It's okay," she said quietly to the old man. "Happens to everyone." The old man's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you, I won't forget this." Lisa returned to her register, unaware she was being filmed, unaware the old man wasn't actually poor or forgetful, unaware he owned the entire restaurant chain, unaware her simple act of kindness would completely transform her life by tomorrow morning. What Lisa didn't know, the scruffy man was actually Richard Powell, billionaire CEO of Golden Plate Restaurants, the nationwide chain she worked for. He was undercover, testing his employees' character when nobody was watching, and Lisa had just passed in spectacular fashion. The other 7 employees he'd tested that week, they'd failed. Some laughed at him, others threatened to call police. One even followed him outside to take photos of the bum to post online. But not Lisa, and what she'd done went far beyond company policy. 3 months earlier, Richard Powell sat in his corner office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. 63 years old, with silver hair and the crisp posture of someone who'd never known physical labor, he stared at the quarterly report. "Profits down 18%, his CFO announced. "Customer satisfaction at record lows. Employee turnover nearly 60%. Something's wrong, Richard." Richard drummed his fingers on his mahogany desk. His restaurants were failing and he couldn't understand why. The menu hadn't changed. The prices remained competitive. The marketing budget had actually increased. "What about our people?" Richard asked suddenly. His executive team exchanged glances. "What about them?" asked Harrison Wells, the operations director. "Are they happy? Do they care about our customers?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. "They're just cashiers and cooks, Richard," Harrison said finally. "Minimum wage workers, they do their jobs. What more do you want?" Richard stood up and walked to the window. 30 years earlier, he'd opened his first restaurant with nothing but a small loan and a dream. He'd worked the grill himself, learned every customer's name, treated his few employees like family. Now he had 738 locations and couldn't name a single frontline worker. "I want to see it myself," Richard announced. "No security, no advance notice. I want to work in our restaurants alongside our people as one of them." "You mean like that TV show?" his marketing director asked, perking up. "We could film it, use it for—" "No cameras," Richard interrupted. "No publicity, just me seeing the truth." His team tried to talk him out of it, citing safety concerns, scheduling issues, and the sheer impracticality of a billionaire flipping burgers. But Richard was determined. That night, Richard looked in the mirror as he trimmed his signature white beard down to stubble. His wife Catherine watched with concern from the doorway of their marble bathroom. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "You could just hire better managers." Richard shook his head. "I built this company on connection, Catherine. Somewhere along the way I lost that. Our customers feel it. Our employees feel it. I need to see what's really happening." 2 days later, Ray Peters applied for a job at a Golden Plate restaurant in Philadelphia. His resume showed a spotty work history. His references, actually Richard's college friends, described him as mostly reliable. The desperate manager hired him on the spot. For 6 weeks, Richard worked in 8 different restaurants across the country. He cleaned bathrooms in Denver. He worked the drive-thru in Atlanta. He mopped floors in Seattle. And everywhere he saw the same problems. Managers who treated employees like machinery. Employees who didn't care because nobody cared about them. Customers who felt the disconnect in every interaction. By week 5, Richard had seen enough. He developed a test. He would visit each restaurant as a customer, pretend to be unable to pay, and see how his employees responded. Not just what company policy said they should do, but how they treated a vulnerable human being when nobody was watching. The results devastated him. In Boston, the cashier called him a deadbeat and threatened to call police. In Chicago, the manager followed him outside, berating him until he left the property. In Dallas, 2 employees took photos, laughing about another freeloader. Then came San Diego, and Lisa Chen. Lisa hadn't always worked at Golden Plate. 6 months earlier, she'd been a nursing student with a full scholarship. Then her mother got sick. Cancer. Stage 4. Lisa dropped everything to care for her. The medical bills destroyed their small saving. After her mother died, Lisa found herself alone, in debt, with no degree and few prospects. Golden Plate hired her because they were always short-staffed. That morning, before her shift, Lisa had visited her mother's grave. "I'm okay, Mom," she'd whispered to the small headstone, "taking it day by day just like you taught me." She'd placed a single daisy, all she could afford, on the fresh soil. When Lisa arrived at work, her manager Emma immediately cornered her. "You're covering Tanya's shift too," Emma announced. She quit again. Lisa nodded, calculating the extra hours against her mounting bills. Every dollar mattered now. Angry customers, broken equipment, a spilled drink that Lisa had to clean up while the customer who knocked it over watched without offering to help. Then the old man arrived. Shabby clothes, hesitant voice. He ordered the cheapest meal on the menu and sat alone in the corner, staring out the window as he ate. When he came to pay and couldn't find enough money, Lisa saw something in his eyes she recognized. Dignity stretched to its breaking point. She'd been there herself, counting pennies at the grocery store while people sighed impatiently behind her. The crushing weight of financial struggle wasn't just about money. It was about feeling invisible, disposable. So Lisa paid, not because company policy suggested it, not because anyone was watching, simply because this stranger needed help and she could provide it. What she didn't see, the small camera disguised as a button on the old man's jacket, recording everything. After his meal, Richard left the restaurant and walked to the black SUV waiting around the corner. His assistant sat inside with a laptop. "Play it," Richard instructed. They watched the interaction again. Lisa's kindness, the manager's irritation. The difference was stark. "Find out everything about her," Richard said, "and set up a meeting with the board tomorrow." The next morning, Lisa woke at 5:30 a.m. as usual. Her apartment was small, just one room with a kitchenette, but it was clean and hers. Photos of her mother covered one wall. "Work hard, stay kind, find joy in small things." Her mother's life philosophy, now Lisa's mantra. Lisa dressed in her uniform, applied minimal makeup, and headed to the bus stop. Another double shift awaited. She didn't notice the black SUV following her. At the restaurant, Emma greeted her with more bad news. "Corporate's coming today. Some big inspection. Clean everything twice." Lisa nodded and got to work. At 11:30 a.m., the front doors opened and 3 people in expensive suits walked in. The restaurant fell silent. "That's him," a cook whispered frantically. "That's Richard Powell, the CEO." Lisa glanced up from the register. Her heart stopped. The old man from yesterday. Except now he was transformed. Designer suit, confident posture, professional haircut, but the same kind eyes. He walked directly to her register, ignoring the managers scrambling around him. "Hello, Lisa," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. "You're not really broke, are you?" A small smile crossed his face. "No, but you really are kind." Richard turned to the now silent restaurant. "Could I have everyone's attention, please? Employees and customers." Conversation stopped. All eyes turned to him. "My name is Richard Powell. I founded Golden Plate Restaurants 30 years ago with a simple mission: to create places where people felt valued, both those who eat here and those who work here. Somewhere along the way, we lost that mission. I've spent the last 6 weeks working undercover in our restaurants to find out why." He gestured toward Lisa. "Yesterday, I conducted a test. I came in pretending to be unable to pay for my meal. In most locations, I was treated with contempt. But here, this young woman paid for a stranger's meal out of her own pocket. Not because of company policy, not for recognition, simply because it was the right thing to do. Lisa's face burned with embarrassment. "Lisa Chen," Richard continued, "you represent everything this company was built on, everything I wanted to return to. So I'm here to offer you a new position. I want you to head our new employee development program, teaching our values to every person who works for us. The salary is $85,000 a year, with full benefits, effective immediately." The restaurant erupted in gasps. Lisa felt the room spin around her. I don't have a degree," she stammered. Richard shook his head. "You have something more valuable, character." Tears filled Lisa's eyes as Richard handed her his business card. "There's a car waiting outside to take you to our corporate office. Your life changes today, if you want it to." As Lisa followed Richard out to the waiting SUV, her mind raced. Just 24 hours ago, she'd been counting coins for bus fare. But Richard's next words stopped her thoughts cold. "There's something else you should know, Lisa. Something that might change your answer." He handed her a folder. Inside was a photograph of another restaurant, another cashier. "This is David Chen, your father." Lisa stared at the photo in shock. The father who'd abandoned her and her mother 15 years ago. The man she'd tried to forget. "He works at our Phoenix location," Richard explained. "He's been there for 3 years. Lisa's hands trembled. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the job I'm offering is based at our headquarters." Lisa stared out the window as the city passed by. Her safe, predictable life suddenly shattered into complications she wasn't prepared for. "I don't know if I'm ready to see him," she whispered. "You don't have to decide now," Richard assured her. "But I believe nothing happens by accident. Maybe this is your chance for answers." As they drove to corporate headquarters, Richard explained more about the job. Lisa would help reshape company culture, train managers, create new employee support programs. Her experiences, both good and bad, would inform everything. "Why me?" Lisa asked finally. "Just because I bought you a sandwich." "Because in that moment when nobody was watching, when you had every reason to look the other way, you chose kindness. That can't be taught, Lisa. That comes from within." The SUV pulled up to an imposing glass building. Lisa had passed it many times but never imagined going inside. "Take the day to think about it," Richard said, handing her another envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000. "Consider it a signing bonus," Richard explained. "Yours to keep whether you take the job or not." Lisa stared at the numbers, thinking of her mother's medical bills, her own student loans. "I need to visit my mom," she said quietly. Richard looked confused. "Her grave," Lisa clarified. "I always talk to her when I have big decisions." Understanding softened Richard's expression. "Of course, the car will take you wherever you need to go." At the cemetery, Lisa sat beside the simple headstone. The single daisy from yesterday had already wilted. "Mom, everything's changing so fast," she whispered. "This amazing opportunity, but Dad's involved somehow. What would you want me to do?" The cemetery remained silent, but as the breeze rustled the leaves, Lisa remembered her mother's words during those final days. "Don't carry my burdens, Lissy. Don't carry my pain or my regrets. Live your own life, find your own joy." Her mother had never spoken bitterly about Lisa's father despite his abandonment. "People make mistakes," she'd say. "Sometimes the hardest thing is to let yourself forgive." Lisa stood up, decision made. She pulled out her phone and called the number on Richard's card. "I'll take the job," she said when he answered. "But I have conditions." Richard listened as Lisa outlined her terms. A chance to develop new employee assistance programs, educational support for workers, and a completely revamped training system focused on compassion as much as competence. "Done," Richard agreed. "When can you start?" "Tomorrow," Lisa said. "But today I need to buy flowers for my mother." As the sun set over San Diego, Lisa returned to her tiny apartment to pack. The events of the day felt surreal. A stranger's meal, a life-changing offer, the father she'd tried to forget. Tomorrow she would fly to Phoenix. Tomorrow her new life would begin. Tomorrow she might face the man who'd walked away. But tonight she simply sat among her mother's photos, realizing how quickly everything could change. How one small action, buying a meal for a stranger, could alter your entire path. She didn't know that in Phoenix, Richard Powell was making another call, telling him his daughter was coming. watching the color drain from David's face as decades of regret crashed down. "She doesn't know that you've been looking for her," Richard said to David. "She doesn't know you've been sending half your paycheck to find her. She doesn't know you never actually abandoned them, that you were told they didn't want you back." David's voice broke. "Will she see me?" "I don't know," Richard answered honestly. "But she'll be here tomorrow, and sometimes tomorrow is all we need." As night fell across America, Richard Powell sat in his Phoenix office, reviewing personnel files from his undercover journey. The people he'd fire, the managers he'd replace, the policies he'd change, but most importantly, the lives he'd improve, starting with Lisa's. The next morning dawned bright and clear as Lisa boarded the company jet, her first time on any airplane. A nervous flight attendant showed her to the only seat. "Mr. Powell sends his apologies," the attendant explained. "He had to take an earlier flight for an emergency board meeting." Lisa nodded, buckling herself in. The check for $10,000 was safely deposited, her few belongings packed in one suitcase, her heart pounding with uncertainty. As the plane took off, Lisa pressed her face to the window, watching San Diego shrink below her. Somewhere down there was her mother's grave, somewhere ahead was her father's restaurant, and between them, flying through empty sky, was Lisa herself, caught between past and future, between grief and possibility, between the life she'd known and the one waiting to begin. The plane banked toward Phoenix, and Lisa closed her eyes. The plane touched down in Phoenix with a gentle bump. Lisa gripped the armrest, still not quite believing she was here. 3 hours ago, she'd been a cashier. Now she was stepping into a new life with a salary she'd never imagined possible. As she walked through the terminal, a tall woman in a crisp suit held a sign with Lisa's name. "Ms. Chen, I'm Vanessa Mills, Mr. Powell's chief of staff. Welcome to Phoenix." Lisa followed Vanessa to another waiting SUV. The Arizona heat hit her like a wall as they walked outside. "The board meeting started an hour ago," Vanessa explained. "Mr. Powell asked that I bring you directly there." Lisa's stomach tightened. "The board meeting? I thought I'd have time to settle in, prepare." "Change of plans," Vanessa interrupted, checking her phone. "There's resistance to the new initiatives. Mr. Powell needs you there." 30 minutes later, Lisa stood outside massive wooden doors, her bus driver's uniform painfully out of place among the designer suits rushing past. Vanessa handed her a folder. "Your proposal. Mr. Powell had it drafted based on your conversation." Before Lisa could respond, the doors swung open. Richard Powell stood there, his expression grim. "Lisa, thank you for coming. I need you to tell them exactly what you told me. No filters, no corporate speak, just the truth." He led her into a boardroom where 12 people sat around a table, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. "Everyone, this is Lisa Chen. Lisa, our board of directors." Lisa clutched the folder, suddenly aware of her chipped nail polish, her worn shoes, her hair still smelling of French fries. A severe-looking woman broke the silence. "Mr. Powell tells us you're the future of our company. That's quite a claim for someone who was making sandwiches yesterday." Several board members chuckled. Richard remained standing, his jaw tight. "Tell them what you told me, Lisa. About your mother. About working double shifts. About what our company feels like from the ground floor." Lisa took a deep breath. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the polished table. As she bent to gather them, she noticed a different document beneath, financial projections showing that Golden Plate was 3 months from bankruptcy if current trends continued. She straightened up, suddenly understanding the stakes. This wasn't just about her new job. It was about thousands of jobs, people like her, working paycheck to paycheck, who couldn't afford to lose their income. "Your company is failing," Lisa said bluntly, "because you've forgotten that businesses aren't buildings or logos or profit margins. They're people. On both sides of the counter." The room fell silent. "Yesterday," she continued, "I served 64 customers. I know because I counted. Not one manager asked how I was doing. Not one corporate policy helped when equipment broke down. We're treated like machines until we break. Then we're replaced." She pointed to the financial documents. "You're losing money because your employees don't care anymore. Why would they? You don't care about them." The stern woman leaned forward. "So we should just hand out raises we can't afford. Is that your expert business advice?" Lisa shook her head. Money isn't always the answer. Recognition is, opportunity is, dignity is. She turned to Richard. Show them the videos. Richard nodded to Vanessa, who dimmed the lights. A projector displayed footage from Richard's undercover operation, employees being berated by managers, customers receiving indifferent service, and finally, Lisa paying for Richard's meal. When the lights came back on, the boardroom remained silent. Implement my proposals, Lisa said quietly, and I promise you'll see change within 3 months. Treat people better, they treat customers better. Simple as that. Richard smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. All in favor, hands raised around the table, some reluctantly, but a clear majority. Motion passed, Richard announced. Lisa's employee development program begins immediately with full funding. As the meeting adjourned, the stern woman approached Lisa. I'm Catherine Powell, she said, Richard's wife, and I think you might actually save this company. Lisa barely had time to process this revelation before Richard was leading her out. That was perfect, he said. Exactly what they needed to hear. Lisa stopped walking. There's something we need to discuss, my father. Richard's expression sobered. He works at our Westfield location, about 20 minutes from here. Does he know I'm here, that I've taken this job? Richard hesitated. He knows. Lisa felt a surge of anger. You told him without asking me. There's more to the story, Richard replied carefully. Things you don't know. But before Richard could answer, Vanessa rushed up with a phone. Emergency at the Westfield location. Some kind of protest. Richard took the phone, his face darkening as he listened. Get the car, he ordered, then turned to Lisa. Change of plans. We need to go to Westfield. Now. 20 minutes later, their SUV pulled into a chaotic scene. Dozens of employees had walked out, forming a picket line. News vans were arriving. Signs read, Fair pay now and respect your workers. What's happening? Lisa asked. Someone leaked information about your promotion and salary, Richard explained grimly. Without context. Now everyone thinks we randomly gave a cashier an executive position while denying their requests for better conditions. He pointed through the crowd. And there's the man behind it. Standing at the center of the protest was Harrison Wells, the operations director from the Manhattan meeting, the man who dismissed employees as just cashiers and cooks. He's been fighting me on these changes from the beginning, Richard explained. Now he's trying to derail everything before it starts. Lisa watched as Harrison spoke to reporters, his expression righteously indignant. We need to stop him, Richard said, reaching for the door handle. Lisa put her hand on his arm. No, I need to stop him. This is exactly why you hired me. Before Richard could object, Lisa was out of the car, walking straight toward the protest. Employees she'd never met stared as she approached. Some pointed. Others whispered. Harrison spotted her and smirked. The cashier who made it big overnight. Tell us, what makes you so special? What about all these workers who have given years to this company? Lisa faced the crowd, heart pounding. Camera lights blinded her. Microphones appeared before her face. My name is Lisa Chen, she began, her voice stronger than she felt. Yesterday, I was working a double shift when an old man couldn't pay for his meal. I covered it with my own money because it was the right thing to do. She pointed to Richard, now standing near the SUV. That man turned out to be Richard Powell, our CEO. He was working undercover to understand why this company is failing. And yes, he offered me a job, not because I paid for his meal, but because of why I did it. The crowd quieted slightly, listening. I'm here to announce that Golden Plate is changing starting today. New employee assistance programs, tuition support, improved training, and yes, better pay. Harrison's smug expression faltered. Mr. Powell didn't send me here with empty promises, Lisa continued. I have authorization to implement immediate changes at this location, starting with a company-wide minimum wage increase to $15 an hour, effective next pay period. The protest faltered as employees exchanged shocked glances. But there's someone else you should hear from, Lisa added, scanning the crowd. Someone who's been fighting for these changes from inside. David Chen, where are you? The crowd parted. A middle-aged Asian man stepped forward, his Golden Plate uniform crisp, his eyes locked on Lisa with an intensity that made her breath catch. Her father, older than in her memories, gray streaking his hair, lines marking his face, but unmistakably him. "This is my father," Lisa announced, her voice wavering slightly. "A man I haven't seen in 15 years. A man I believed abandoned my mother and me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. News cameras zoomed in. "But according to Mr. Powell, he's also the employee who's submitted the most recommendations for worker improvements, who's organized support groups for struggling staff, who's been sending half his paycheck to a private investigator trying to find me." David stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Is it true?" Lisa asked him directly, cameras and protests momentarily forgotten. "Did you look for us?" David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Every day since I lost you. My mother said you left, never called, never wrote." David shook his head. "I called, I wrote, every day for years." He glanced at Harrison Wells, whose face had gone pale. "But someone made sure those messages never reached you." Lisa followed his gaze to Harrison, who was now backing away from the crowd. "What is he talking about?" she demanded. Richard stepped forward, placing a hand on Harrison's shoulder to stop his retreat. "Harrison was a regional manager 15 years ago," Richard explained, "in San Diego, where your family lived." Lisa's mind raced, pieces falling into place. "He knew my father. Your father was his best employee," Richard continued, "until David reported safety violations at their location. Harrison was demoted. He blamed your father." Harrison tried to pull away, but Richard's grip tightened. "When your parents separated temporarily, a normal rough patch, Harrison saw his chance for revenge. He intercepted David's letters, blocked his calls, told your mother David had abandoned them." Lisa stared at Harrison in horror. "You destroyed our family for a demotion." The protest had completely dissolved now, employees and media captivated by the unfolding drama. Harrison's face contorted with defensive rage. "Your father cost me everything. My career trajectory, my bonus potential. My mother died thinking she wasn't worth coming back for." Lisa cut him off, her voice ice cold. "I grew up without a father because of your wounded pride." David moved to Lisa's side. "I never stopped looking," he said softly. "When your mother changed her phone number, when you moved, when the letters came back unopened, I still tried. I took this job 3 years ago when I heard Elisa Chen worked for the company. But it wasn't you." Lisa turned to him, 15 years of questions in her eyes. "Why didn't you just come to our house? Why didn't you just show up?" Pain crossed David's face. "I did, many times, but Harrison had told your mother I'd threatened her. There was a restraining order. Police were called the 3rd time I tried." The crowd gasped. Camera flashes intensified. Richard stepped forward. "Harrison Wells, you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." As security led a protesting Harrison away, Lisa found herself standing before her father, years of practiced anger suddenly without foundation. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," David replied. "Not yet, we have time now." The protest had completely transformed. Employees surrounded Richard, asking questions about the promised changes. News reporters competed for interviews. And in the middle of the chaos, Lisa and David simply looked at each other, strangers connected by blood and separated by lies. "Did you know?" Lisa asked Richard when he rejoined them. "When you hired me, did you know what Harrison had done?" Richard shook his head. "I knew David had been searching for his daughter. I knew he was one of our most passionate employee advocates. When you told me your story, I suspected a connection. The investigation only finished this morning." Lisa felt overwhelmed. Her new job, her father, Harrison's betrayal, it was too much to process at once. "I need some time," she said finally. Richard nodded. "Of course, but there's still the matter of these employees. They need reassurance that the changes are real." Lisa looked at the crowd, seeing herself in each face. People working hard, trying to make ends meet, wanting to believe things could improve. She straightened her shoulders and approached them. "My name is Lisa Chen," she began again. "As of yesterday, I'm the new head of employee development for Golden Plate. My first task is to implement changes at this location, starting today. I need 10 volunteers who can help identify what needs fixing first." Hands shot up around her. People stepped forward, eager to be heard. For the next 3 hours, Lisa sat in the break room, listening to employees share their experiences. David brought her coffee. Richard took notes. The news crews eventually left, but the conversation continued. By sunset, Lisa had a comprehensive list of issues to address, from broken equipment to inadequate training to managers who ruled by fear. "This is exactly what I needed," she told Richard as the last employees left. "Real feedback from real people." Richard smiled. "And this is exactly why I hired you. You listen." David lingered nearby, uncertain of his place in this new dynamic. "Would you like to get dinner?" he asked Lisa hesitantly. "To talk, or just sit together, whatever you're comfortable with." Lisa looked at this stranger who was her father, the man she'd blamed for so much pain, the man who had never stopped looking for her. "Dinner would be good," she said softly. As they walked to the restaurant next door, Richard called after them. "Lisa, I'm announcing the changes company-wide tomorrow. I need you both there." Lisa nodded, then turned back to her father. They sat at a corner booth, awkward silence between them. "I have your eyes," Lisa said finally. David smiled. "And your mother's spirit, her courage. She never said bad things about you, even at the end." David's eyes filled with tears. "How was she, at the end? Peaceful, still hoping you might come back someday?" The pain on David's face made Lisa regret her words. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean." "No," David interrupted. "I need to hear it, all of it. The good and the bad. 15 years is a lot to catch up on." And so Lisa told him about her mother's battle with cancer, about dropping out of nursing school, about the small apartment with photos on every wall. As she spoke, a weight lifted from her shoulders, the burden of being the only keeper of these memories, the only witness to her mother's final days. "She would be so proud of you," David said when she finished. "So proud of the woman you've become." Lisa felt tears threaten. "I'm still figuring out who that is." David reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Whoever she is, I'd like to know her, if you'll let me." Lisa nodded, not trusting her voice. The next morning, Lisa arrived at Golden Plate headquarters wearing new clothes Richard had arranged for her. Professional attire that actually fit, hair neatly styled. The transformation was striking, but she still felt like herself inside, just a version with possibilities she'd never imagined. The company auditorium was packed with employees and media. Richard stood on stage, waiting for her. "Ready?" he asked as she joined him. Lisa nodded, scanning the crowd until she found her father in the third row. He gave her a small thumbs up. Richard stepped to the microphone. "3 months ago, I realized our company had lost its way. We'd forgotten that businesses are built on people, not profits. So I went undercover to see for myself what was happening in our restaurants." He gestured to Lisa. "What I found was both troubling and inspiring. I found managers who'd never been properly trained, equipment that hadn't been updated in a decade, policies that punished initiative. But I also found extraordinary people doing their best despite these challenges. People like Lisa Chen, who showed me what this company could be again." He outlined the changes: better wages, improved conditions, new training programs, career advancement opportunities. "This isn't charity," he emphasized. "This is smart business. Treat people well, they treat customers well. Profits follow naturally." As Richard spoke, Lisa noticed the board members watching from the front row. Catherine Powell gave her a subtle nod of approval. "And now," Richard continued, "I'd like our new head of employee development to explain how these changes will be implemented." Lisa stepped forward, conscious of hundreds of eyes upon her. Just yesterday she'd been one of them, doubting that management ever listened, that anything would change. "I was a cashier 36 hours ago," she began. "I know most of you are thinking this is just another corporate show, some publicity stunt that will fade once the cameras leave." Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. "You have every right to be skeptical, but these changes are real. And to prove it, I'm going to share our implementation schedule with hard deadlines and measurable outcomes." She detailed the plan: wage increases beginning next pay period, equipment upgrades within 30 days, new training programs rolling out over 60 days, manager evaluation starting immediately. "And most importantly," she concluded, "we're establishing employee advisory councils at every location, real power to affect real change. Because the best ideas don't come from corporate offices, they come from the people doing the work every day." The applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation. Afterward, as employees lined up to speak with her, Lisa felt a tap on her shoulder. David stood there, pride shining in his eyes. "Your mother would have loved this moment," he said. Lisa smiled. "I think she somehow made it happen." 6 months later, Lisa stood in Richard's office, reviewing the quarterly report. "Profits up 12%, she announced. Customer satisfaction at 5-year highs. Employee turnover down 38%. Richard smiled from behind his desk, and all it took was remembering what mattered. Lisa nodded, thinking of how much had changed. She now had an office down the hall, a team of 30 people implementing her programs nationwide, a small house with a garden where she'd planted daisies in her mother's memory, and dinner with her father every Sunday, slowly rebuilding what had been broken. "We're not done yet," she reminded Richard. "There's still the franchise locations, the international expansion." Richard held up his hand, laughing. "Always looking ahead. That's why I hired you." As Lisa left his office, her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Don't forget, dinner with Catherine and Richard tonight." The Powells had become like family these past months, mentoring her, guiding her through the corporate world that had once seemed so foreign. That evening, as they sat around Richard and Catherine's dining table, Richard raised his glass. "To second chances," he toasted, "for all of us." Lisa clinked her glass against her father's, thinking of the journey that had brought them here. A simple meal purchased for a stranger, a broken family mended, a company transformed. "I have an announcement," Richard said as dinner concluded. "I'm stepping down as CEO at the end of the year." Shocked silence followed. "Don't look so worried," he chuckled. "I'm not abandoning ship, just moving to chairman of the board. We need new leadership for this new chapter." He looked directly at Lisa, someone who understands both sides of the counter, someone who never forgets where they came from but isn't afraid of where they're going. "The board voted yesterday. They want you, Lisa." Lisa nearly dropped her glass. "Me, CEO, but I've only been here 6 months. 6 months in which you've transformed our entire operation," Catherine pointed out. "The numbers speak for themselves." David reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. "You can do this, Lissy." The childhood nickname, unused for 15 years, brought tears to her eyes. "I'll need help," she said finally. "That's the first sign you're ready for the job, knowing you can't do it alone." Later that night, Lisa stood on her back porch, looking up at the stars. Sometimes life changed so gradually you barely noticed. Other times it transformed in an instant. The moment you decided to help a stranger, to forgive a parent, to believe in yourself. One meal, one simple act of kindness. That's all it had taken to set everything in motion. Her phone rang, a FaceTime call from Richard. "Sorry to bother you," he said when she answered, "but there's someone here who wanted to say thank you." He turned the camera to show a young woman in a golden plate uniform. "Ms. Chen, I'm Jenny. I just wanted to tell you, the tuition program you started. I got accepted to nursing school because of it. I start next semester." Lisa felt her throat tighten. "That's wonderful, Jenny. I'll still work weekends," Jenny continued, "but now I can follow my dream, just like you did." After they hung up, Lisa sat in her garden beneath the stars, surrounded by daisies that reminded her of her mother, in a house just blocks from her father, preparing to lead a company that had once just been a job that paid the bills. All because she'd seen someone in need and decided to help. Sometimes the smallest actions created the biggest changes. Sometimes a simple meal could feed more than hunger. It could feed hope. It could change lives. It could build futures. One small act of kindness. One decision to care when no one was watching. That's all it took to change everything. If you enjoyed this story of how one small act of kindness can transform lives, please like this video and subscribe for more inspiring content. And remember, the smallest actions often create the biggest changes. What simple act of kindness might you perform today?